My father said, "Your sister's education matters more than yours." He paid for her, ignored me, and now I'm the one who made it while he was left alone. Hey everyone. I've been meaning to write this out for a while. It's kind of long, but I guess I just need to get it off my chest. Growing up, my dad had a golden child, my sister. He spoiled her rotten, ignored me, and made it clear whose future mattered more. Years later, when reality hit, she left him behind. And the same dad who bet everything on her ended up with nothing while I built my life on my own. My name's Darlene. I grew up with one younger sister, Sophie, and our parents split up when I was still pretty young. My mom and dad didn't get along at all, but they managed a custody arrangement where we mostly lived with my mom and spent weekends with my dad, Richard. On paper, it doesn't sound too bad, but if you grew up in a split family, you probably know how ugly the favoritism thing can get. And in our case, it wasn't even subtle. Richard had a favorite, and it wasn't me. He adored Sophie like she was some kind of little princess. Whatever she wanted, he'd bend over backwards for her. I, on the other hand, was more like an afterthought. If I got something, it was usually because Sophie already got double. You'd think parents try to hide that stuff. It was like he enjoyed reminding me I wasn't the priority. One of the earliest times I realized it clearly was during a Halloween, when I was maybe 10 or 11. Mom didn't have much money, so she told us she could only afford one new costume that year. Richard heard about it and told Sophie, "Don't worry, I'll get you one." He didn't say a word to me. That year, Sophie wanted to go as some kind of vampire queen or whatever. So Richard took her shopping and dropped a bunch of money on her costume. It had the full dress, fake fangs, glittery accessories, even special makeup. She looked like she walked out of a movie set. Meanwhile, I was told to be resourceful and reuse an old skeleton outfit I'd worn 2 years earlier, one that didn't even fit right anymore. It had a rip on the sleeve. The paint was faded, and I felt ridiculous in it. The night of the school Halloween dance rolled around, and Sophie was glowing. Richard kept taking pictures of her in the living room, telling her how beautiful and elegant she looked. He didn't even take one picture of me, not one. I remember standing there tugging at my too short costume pants while Sophie twirled around like she was royalty. At the dance itself, it only got worse. Everyone crowded around Sophie, complimenting her costume, and she loved every second of it. I was hanging in the back, trying not to feel embarrassed, but kids noticed. One group of boys asked me why I couldn't afford something better. Sophie heard it and laughed along with them, my own sister. That's when it really hit me. Richard wasn't just spoiling Sophie. He was teaching her that it was fine to laugh at me, too. When we got back to Richard's that night, I thought maybe he'd at least ask if I had fun. Nope. He only wanted to hear about Sophie's evening, her friends, her compliments. I sat on the couch listening to them recap every detail of her perfect night like I hadn't even been there. I remember going to bed with this heavy feeling in my chest, realizing that to my dad, I was basically invisible. The Halloween costume incident wasn't a one-off. It set the tone for everything that followed. Sophie got new cleats, uniforms, and school supplies every year. I was told to reuse old gear, even binders with her doodles still on them. When I pushed back, Dad brushed me off. "You're the older one. You don't need as much. Stop being selfish. Let Sophie enjoy things." The favoritism was so obvious, even neighbors commented. But Dad laughed it off. "Sophie needs more attention. You'll be fine. I cared. I just didn't have a choice." It wasn't like my mom didn't try. She always did her best to keep things balanced. But since Richard made more money, he had the power, and Sophie knew it. She learned fast that if she wanted something, she could just whine to Dad and he'd deliver. That made her entitled and smug. Even at that age, after that Halloween, things didn't really improve. If anything, they got more complicated when the custody arrangement changed. Originally, me and Sophie would go to Richard's every second weekend, Friday to Sunday, then back to Mom's place. But sometime around middle school, Richard pushed for more time with his kids. Mom didn't really want to agree, but courts tend to side with the parent who makes more money and looks more stable. The new schedule meant we stayed with him every other weekend, plus Sunday night through Tuesday morning. It sounds small, but it completely changed our routine. Instead of Mom driving us to school Monday mornings, we had to wake up earlier at Richard's, catch the train, and go our separate ways because me and Sophie went to different schools. Mine was stricter, and my teachers didn't have much patience. Sophie's school was more laid back, but that didn't matter to Richard. He made me responsible for her anyway. The first time it happened, Sophie fell asleep on the train. I was nervous because my stop came before hers. I tried shaking her awake, but she just mumbled something and rolled over against the window. I didn't want to be late, so I got off at my stop. Big mistake. Richard called me later that night, screaming that I'd abandoned my sister. Sophie had missed her stop and had to backtrack, which made her late. He told me, "You're the older sister. It's your job to make sure she gets there." From then on, it became a routine. Every Monday and Tuesday morning, I had to make sure Sophie woke up at her stop. If I got off without waking her, Richard would lose it, and of course sometimes she refused to wake up even when I tried. Either way, I was the one who got yelled at. His solution was basically, if you're late, too bad. Just stay with her until her stop. But that meant I was late to my school, and my teachers didn't let it slide. My teachers weren't cruel people, but they were strict. Being late twice a month added up. I got detentions, lost privileges, and was constantly under watch. I tried explaining it to them that I had to look after my sister or Richard would go ballistic, but they just told me, family problems aren't excuses. You're responsible for yourself. So no matter which way I turned, I was screwed. To make it worse, Richard added another demand. I had to carry both mine and Sophie's bags on the last day of our stay with him. One morning, after we got off the train, Sophie snatched my bag before heading toward her school. At the entrance in front of her friends, she unzipped it and pulled out my stuff, laughing at me while they joined in. One morning, I flat out refused to carry her bag. Sophie smirked and dropped it at my feet like it was a test. I left it there. When Richard found out later, he tore into me. I still remember him yelling in my face, "Do you want your sister to fail school because of your stubbornness? Her education matters more right now. You'll be fine, but she needs the extra help." That line stuck with me. Her education matters more. Around this time, Mom started noticing the toll it was taking. She saw me coming home stressed, sometimes with detention slips. One night, after Richard dropped us off, she pulled me aside and asked what was going on. I broke down and told her everything. The train, the bags, the yelling. She was furious. The next week, she confronted Richard during drop-off. I wasn't supposed to hear, but I was standing near the doorway and caught a lot of it. "Mom, stop putting all this on Darlene. She's a kid, not your assistant. Sophie can carry her own things and wake herself up." Richard, "You don't get it. Sophie has potential. She just needs guidance." Mom, "And Darlene doesn't? You're sabotaging her. She's getting in trouble at school because of you." Richard, "If Darlene can't handle being a big sister, that's on her. Maybe if she wasn't so selfish, Sophie would thrive even more." That was the first real time I'd seen Mom stand up to him directly. Usually she tried to keep things calm, but that night she didn't hold back. They argued for nearly 20 minutes, voices rising, until Sophie interrupted with her usual whiny tone. "Why are you always fighting about me? Can we just go home?" Of course, Richard immediately softened for her, saying, "It's not your fault, sweetheart. Some people just don't understand how special you are." He looked right at me when he said it. Mom drove us home after that, still fuming. She told me, "You're not crazy. He's wrong for putting that on you. I'll do what I can." But deep down, I knew her hands were tied. She didn't control Richard, and the custody agreement was already in place. Every second Monday and Tuesday, I felt like I was walking into a trap. Either I got in trouble at school, or I got screamed at by Richard, or Sophie found some new way to humiliate me. It was like a cycle I couldn't escape. Looking back, those years were exhausting, not because of one huge dramatic event, but because of all the little humiliations piled on top of each other. Each train ride, each bag, each insult chipped away a little bit. And every time I thought maybe Richard would see how unfair it was, he doubled down on making sure I knew where I stood. Second place every single time. By the time I hit high school, the favoritism was basically part of daily life. I stopped expecting fairness from Richard, but that didn't mean it stopped hurting. If anything, it got worse because now Sophie had figured out how to play it to her advantage. She wasn't just the favorite anymore. She used it like a weapon against me. Freshman year, I decided I wanted to do something outside of just schoolwork. I wasn't a naturally outgoing kid, but I liked sports. Basketball seemed like a good fit since I was tall and could hold my own. I told Richard about tryouts, and he barely reacted. Just a shrug and a, "Don't get your hopes up, you're not exactly athletic." That was it. Meanwhile, Sophie told him she wanted to join cheerleading. He went nuts with excitement. He drove her to practices, bought her the uniform and extra gear, even showed up to take pictures of her first game on the sidelines. When my basketball tryouts came around, he didn't even ask how they went. For the record, I actually made the team, but he never came to a single game, not one. That first season, I played my heart out. I wasn't the star, but I contributed, and it meant a lot to me. I'd look up in the stands scanning for Richard, but his seat was always empty. Afterward, when I told him we won a big game, he literally said, "That's nice." But Sophie's squad performed at halftime, and she was incredible. I wanted to scream. Sophie, of course, ate it up. She'd rub it in my face whenever she got something. If she got new sneakers for cheer, she'd walk around me deliberately saying, "Wow, Dad really believes in me." If Richard missed my game, she'd laugh and say, "Maybe he just knows you're not worth watching." She said it with this smug tone that made me want to disappear. At home, Mom tried to support me, but she didn't have the money or the influence. She came to a couple of my games when she could, cheering the loudest from the stands, but Richard's absence was always obvious. The other kids' parents would show up as a family, while mine were split, with only one side bothering to care. By sophomore year, I had picked up a part-time job at a small grocery store near home. I stocked shelves and helped customers. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave me some money and independence. Richard didn't like it. He said, "You shouldn't waste time working. Focus on school." But when Sophie got a job babysitting for a family friend, he praised her nonstop about being responsible and good with kids. Same situation, two different reactions. One Saturday, we had a big basketball game against our rival school. I'd been working hard, staying late at practices, and I was starting to actually play starter minutes. I asked Richard if he could come just this once. He promised he would. I held on to that hope all week. Game day came. I played my best game ever. Scored, defended, hustled like crazy. When the buzzer went off, we won by a single basket. I looked up into the stands, searching. No Richard. Later, when I asked him about it, he said Sophie had a cheer showcase that day. "That's more important. You'll have other games." I can't explain how crushing that was. It wasn't even the first time he'd let me down, but it hit differently because I'd begged him, and he just brushed it off like it was nothing. Meanwhile, Sophie bragged about how Richard had brought flowers to her showcase. Flowers! He never even congratulated me with a handshake after my games. She waved them in my face when we got back, saying, "Guess who Dad really cares about?" High school was basically me learning how to keep my head down and push through. Between school, basketball, debate, and my part-time job, I stayed busy. But no matter what I did, Richard never cared. He didn't even pretend. Sophie got everything: attention, money, praise, while I got ignored or mocked. The only silver lining was that my coaches and a few teachers noticed my effort. My basketball coach told me I had real grit. My debate coach said I was one of the sharpest thinkers on the team. Those comments mattered more than Richard's opinion because they were earned. But still, when you're 16 and your dad acts like you don't exist, it's a pain that sits in your chest every day. Sophie, on the other hand, thrived on being his golden child. She strutted around school like she was better than me. And honestly, people believed it because she had Richard backing her up. I was the quiet one, the worker, the one no one paid attention to, and she never let me forget it. Looking back, high school was when I started building the mindset that carried me later. If I wanted to succeed, I couldn't expect anyone to hand it to me, especially not Richard, especially not Sophie. If I was going to get anywhere, it was going to be through sheer effort. But man, it was hard not to hate them for making me feel like I wasn't worth anything in those years. Senior year was supposed to feel exciting. Everyone was talking about where they were applying, what they wanted to study, and what their future would look like. For me, it was stressful from the start. I was balancing basketball, debate, schoolwork, and my part-time job at the grocery store. On top of that, I was filling out college applications at night, half asleep but determined. Sophie, of course, had it easier. Richard hired her an SAT tutor, covered all her application fees, and even drove her to look at campuses. When I asked him once if he could help me with my fees, he waved me off with, Your mom can handle that. I've already put a lot into Sophie. So I worked extra shifts to pay my way. I didn't complain to him about it, but it stung. Then came the day of the letters. I still remember rushing home, heart pounding, ripping open the envelope from the school I dreamed of since freshman year. I got in. I wanted to scream with relief. For a second, I thought, maybe this will finally make him proud. Maybe this is the moment where he looks at me differently. A couple days later, Sophie got her letter. Same school. She squealed and ran straight to Richard. His reaction was like she'd just been crowned queen. He bragged to anyone who would listen, calling family members, saying his brilliant daughter was about to take over the world. I sat there with my acceptance letter, waiting for him to say something similar to me. Instead, when I told him I got in too, his response was flat. That's good, but Sophie's the one we need to focus on. I blinked, thinking I misheard him. What do you mean? Richard put his hand on Sophie's shoulder and smiled at her. I'm going to pay for Sophie's tuition, housing, everything she needs. She deserves the best shot. I froze. What about me? He didn't even hesitate. You'll figure it out. You're resourceful. Sophie has real potential. She just needs support to get there. That was it. No discussion, no thought, just a flat-out dismissal. For once, I didn't swallow it. I felt my chest tighten and words came out before I could stop them. So you're just not going to help me at all? I worked my ass off to get in, and you act like it doesn't matter. Richard leaned back in his chair, his face cold. Watch your tone. You're lucky you even got accepted. Don't throw a tantrum because your sister earned my support. Earned? I snapped. You paid for her tutors, her fees, her visits, everything. I did this by myself with no help. And now you're telling me it means nothing. That she deserves everything handed to her, and I should just what? Take out loans until I drown? Sophie smirked from across the room, clearly enjoying it. Maybe Dad just knows who's going to succeed, she said. Don't be jealous, Darlene. It's not a good look. That set me off. Jealous? You've had everything spoon-fed to you since we were kids. You don't even know what hard work is, Eyes. You walk around acting like you're better, but if Dad stopped paying for everything, you'd fall apart in a week. Richard slammed his hand on the table. That's enough. Don't you dare talk to your sister that way. She's destined for bigger things than you'll ever understand. You should be supporting her instead of tearing her down. I stood up, my hands shaking. You don't see me at all, do you? No matter what I do, I'll never be good enough because you decided years ago that Sophie's the star and I'm nothing. But I'll tell you this. I'm going to make it without your money, and when I do, you won't get to take credit. Richard's face twisted with anger. Don't be dramatic. You'll thank me someday for pushing you. I laughed bitterly. No, I won't. You didn't push me. You abandoned me. The room went silent for a moment. Sophie rolled her eyes, muttering something about me being overly sensitive. But I didn't care. For the first time, I said exactly what I'd wanted to for years. That night, I sat down at my desk and mapped out a plan. Loans, scholarships, jobs, whatever it took. I wasn't going to rely on him. Mom tried to comfort me, saying she was proud, that she'd help where she could, but we both knew it wouldn't be much. Still, her support mattered more than Richard's money ever could. Over the summer, the contrast between me and Sophie was glaring. She spent her days shopping for dorm decorations and bragging about how exciting it was going to be. Richard drove her around, making sure she had everything perfect. I spent mine working late shifts, saving what little I could, and filling out financial aid paperwork. It wasn't fair, but it was real. And deep down, I knew this. Sophie might have Richard's money, but she didn't have resilience. She didn't know what it felt like to build something yourself. I did, and that was the one thing she couldn't take from me. When I turned 18, I made the decision to live full-time with my mom. By then, I'd had enough of Richard's house and his constant favoritism. Legally, I was old enough to choose, and I didn't hesitate. Mom didn't have much space or money, but she had something better. She treated me like I mattered, even if she couldn't fix everything. Being in a place where I wasn't the punching bag was a huge relief. College was the next step, and it wasn't easy. Since Richard refused to help me, I had to piece everything together. Because I lived with Mom more than half the year, financial aid was based on her income, not his, which meant I qualified for loans and a little need-based help. Still, it barely covered tuition. So I picked up a work-study program and kept my grocery store job on weekends. Sophie, meanwhile, moved into her dorm like royalty. Richard paid for everything: tuition, housing, books, even gave her an allowance. She spent her first month of college posting pictures of her decorated dorm room, new clothes, and parties. I didn't even have enough money for a proper desk in my mom's apartment. My study space was basically a corner of the kitchen table. I tried not to compare myself, but it was impossible. Every time I saw Sophie brag online, it reminded me how unfair things were. Still, I kept my head down. If I wanted a future, I had to earn it myself. The grind hit me fast. My weekdays were a blur. Classes in the morning, library shifts in the afternoon, homework at night. Weekends, I stocked shelves at the grocery store, coming home with sore feet and just enough energy to collapse on my bed. Sometimes I'd wake up at 2 a.m., still in my work clothes, books scattered on the floor. I wasn't living the college experience people always talk about. No parties, no trips, no carefree nights. My friends would invite me to hang out, but I usually had to decline because of work. A few stopped inviting me altogether after a while. It hurt, but I told myself I was building something bigger than just memories. There were times I thought I wouldn't make it. One semester, I was behind on 2 major essays and had 3 back-to-back shifts at the store. I remember sitting on the bus home at midnight, my head pounding, wondering if this was all worth it. Then I'd think back to Richard telling me Sophie had potential, and I didn't. That anger gave me fuel. I refused to give him the satisfaction of being right. Funny enough, even though Richard wasn't paying for me, he still managed to throw in insults. Every time Sophie went home for a break, she'd come back bragging about how Richard asked about her classes, her professors, her grades. She'd rub it in, saying, "Dad says you're probably going to drop out." She never missed a chance to twist the knife. The irony was that Sophie, with all her money and support, wasn't exactly thriving. She skipped classes, partied too much, and called Richard whenever she needed help with an assignment. He always bailed her out, even paying for a private tutor when she failed one of her midterms. Meanwhile, I kept grinding. My professors noticed. One of them, a history professor, pulled me aside after class and told me he admired how hard I worked despite juggling so much. That small acknowledgement meant more to me than anything Richard had ever said. By my second year, I managed to earn a small merit scholarship based on grades. It didn't cover everything, but it reduced the loan burden a little. That felt like proof that my effort wasn't wasted. Living with Mom was also better for my sanity. She couldn't do much financially, but she always encouraged me. She'd leave little notes on the kitchen table wishing me good luck on exams, or heat up leftovers if I came home late from work. It sounds small, but when you've lived years in a house where every word was criticism, those gestures made a difference. Of course, Sophie couldn't resist taking shots at me whenever we crossed paths. One Thanksgiving, we were all at Mom's place. Sophie showed up, flaunting her new phone that Richard had bought her. At dinner, she leaned across the table and said, "So, Darlene, how many hours do you work a week now? Don't you ever get tired of playing the struggling student role?" I looked her dead in the eye and said, "At least I'm learning how to stand on my own 2 feet." The table went quiet for a second. Sophie rolled her eyes, but Mom gave me a small smile. Richard wasn't there, of course. He rarely bothered with family holidays unless Sophie begged him. That night, lying in bed, I thought about how different our lives were. Sophie had every advantage, but no drive. I had every obstacle, but I was building resilience whether I liked it or not. By junior year, I'd gotten into a rhythm. I still worked 2 jobs, but I was more efficient with my time. My grades stayed solid, and I even started helping a couple younger students with tutoring, earning a bit on the side. I wasn't perfect. I had nights where I broke down, nights where I thought about quitting. But every semester I finished made me stronger, and every semester Sophie coasted made her weaker. By the time I was finishing up college, the cracks were starting to show in Richard's perfect little world. For years, he had poured everything into Sophie, acting like she was his masterpiece. But the thing about constantly bailing someone out is that eventually they expect it everywhere. Sophie wasn't prepared for life beyond Richard's wallet, and the signs started becoming obvious. The first time I noticed was when Sophie failed another midterm. Richard hired her yet another tutor, but instead of working harder, she blew it off. She'd rather be at parties or posting pictures online. Her grades slipped, and she switched majors twice. This time, she told everyone it was because she had too many interests, but the truth was she just couldn't stick with anything. Richard, of course, kept covering for her. He called the school, made excuses, sent money for whatever she needed. But even he couldn't hide his frustration forever. One night when Sophie was home for break, I overheard him scolding her in the kitchen. "You can't keep wasting opportunities, Sophie. Do you know how much I'm paying for this education?" Sophie, in her usual smug way, shot back. "Well, maybe if you supported me instead of criticizing, I'd do better. It's your job to make sure I succeed." That was the first time I saw him speechless. He'd raised her to believe she was owed everything, and now she was turning that attitude on him. Meanwhile, I was grinding through my final semester. My loans were heavy, my schedule insane, but I was making progress. I had a professor who recommended me for an internship, and that led to a small but solid job offer after graduation. It wasn't glamorous, but it was something I earned on my own. Richard didn't congratulate me when Mom mentioned it at a family gathering. He brushed it off and changed the subject back to Sophie's potential. But deep down, I think he knew the difference between us was becoming clear. Sophie's problems didn't stop with school. She had a couple of messy relationships that ended badly, mostly because she expected her boyfriends to treat her the way Richard did, constantly catering to her. When they didn't, she accused them of not appreciating her. It got to the point where even her friends started drifting away because she was exhausting to be around. Richard, though, still clung to the image of Sophie as his golden child. He'd complained to Mom that I was distant and cold, but what did he expect? I wasn't going to keep chasing after his approval when he'd made it clear for years I wasn't worth it. I kept my distance, and honestly, it was the best decision I ever made. Then Richard began to age. He'd always been the type to act untouchable, strong, in control, like he had everything figured out. But time doesn't care about ego. He had health scares, doctor visits, and suddenly the man who thought he ruled over everyone wasn't as invincible as he liked to pretend. Naturally, he turned to Sophie for comfort. He expected her to step up, maybe show the loyalty he thought he'd earned after spoiling her for 2 decades. But Sophie wasn't interested. She didn't want to deal with hospitals or stress or even just being there for him. She still wanted to party, travel, and post about her amazing life. I'll never forget one phone call where Richard admitted to me, almost in a whisper, "I don't think Sophie appreciates what I've done for her." I bit my tongue so hard it hurt because all I wanted to say was, "Now you know how it feels." Instead, I just said, "You raised her that way." He didn't respond. As for me, things were slowly improving. I moved into a small apartment near my new job, still tight on money, but independent. Every bill I paid, every late-night project I finished, it reminded me that I was building something on my own terms. I wasn't waiting for anyone to hand me anything. At work, my boss called me reliable. My professors stayed in touch and recommended me for opportunities. I had built a reputation for being dependable, hardworking, things Sophie never bothered with. Over time, even extended family started to see it. At one holiday dinner, an aunt asked Richard if Sophie had plans after graduation. He muttered something vague, clearly embarrassed that she was still figuring it out. Then she turned to me and asked about my job, and when I explained, she said, "Wow, Darlene, you've really built something for yourself." Richard looked uncomfortable. By now, Richard and Sophie's little bubble was cracking. Sophie wasn't the golden success story he had bragged about for years. She was floundering, lost, and entitled. Richard was facing the uncomfortable truth that his favorite wasn't paying off, while the daughter he ignored had quietly pulled herself ahead. By the time a few more years had passed, the gap between me and Sophie was impossible to ignore. I wasn't living some glamorous life, but I had stability. I had a decent job, a small apartment I could actually afford, and people at work respected me. I wasn't chasing anyone's approval anymore, especially not Richard's. Sophie, on the other hand, was stuck. She graduated late after switching majors twice, and even then, she struggled to keep a job. She'd quit when things got tough, blaming bosses or coworkers for not appreciating her. She was in and out of bad relationships, always looking for someone to take care of her the way Richard used to. The truth was, she didn't know how to stand on her own. Richard was aging fast. The health issues that had started creeping in back when I was in college weren't going away. He called me a few times asking if I'd come visit, but the conversations always felt forced. He'd start with small talk and then try to slip in comments about Sophie. "She just needs time to figure things out," he'd say, like he was trying to convince himself. I kept my distance. I wasn't cruel about it, but I wasn't going to pretend either. Years of being told I didn't matter don't just disappear because someone suddenly wants your attention. The moment I really felt the full circle was at a networking event my company held. It happened to fall near Halloween, which felt weirdly symbolic given everything. It wasn't a costume party or anything, just a formal mixer where different people from the industry gathered. I had a chance to shake hands, meet managers, and talk about projects I'd worked on. For the first time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. And then I saw her. Sophie walked in with a group from a partner company. Someone she knew had brought her along. She wasn't there as a professional, more like a guest trying to network. She looked different than in her college days. Not glowing with confidence, but strained, like she was trying too hard. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. I overheard her telling someone she was between jobs, but she dressed it up like it was by choice. We made eye contact and she came over. "Darlene, I didn't know you'd be here." I just nodded. "Yeah, work brought me." She looked me up and down like she was trying to measure how well I'd done. "So, what are you doing these days?" I explained my position, how I'd moved up a bit at the company, and how I was working on some big projects. It wasn't bragging, it was just the truth. I could see her face tighten when she realized I wasn't struggling anymore. "That's good for you," she said, though it sounded forced. Then she added, "Dad always said you were persistent." I smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "Persistent? Yeah. He also said I'd never really do well. Funny how that turned out." She didn't reply. She just excused herself to rejoin her group, but the look on her face told me everything. She wasn't the golden child anymore. She wasn't even close. Later that night, I got a call from Mom. She said Richard had been asking about me again, saying he wanted to reconnect. I didn't feel anger the way I used to, just a kind of emptiness. He had made his choices. He chose to put all his energy into Sophie, and now when it didn't pay off, he was left with regret. I didn't rush to call him back. Maybe one day I will, maybe not. But I know this much. I don't owe him anything. The most satisfying part wasn't revenge or proving him wrong to his face. It was knowing that I built my life on my own. No shortcuts, no handouts, no favoritism, just me pushing forward when no one believed in me. And the irony is, the very things Richard used to mock me for, working too much, being too serious, focusing on responsibilities, those were the exact things that carried me ahead. While Sophie struggled with bills and failed jobs, I was moving forward step by step. Looking back, it's almost funny how clear it all seems. The Halloween where I wore a ripped costume and Sophie was treated like royalty. The train rides where I had to carry her bags while Richard yelled at me. The basketball games he never came to. The college acceptance he dismissed. Every one of those moments felt crushing at the time, but together they built something stronger in me. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that being underestimated can be fuel. People like Richard and Sophie thought they were keeping me in my place, but really they were teaching me how to fight for myself. Now, when I think about Richard, he bet everything on Sophie, and in the end, he was left with nothing. No partner, no dependable daughter, and failing health that he had to face largely on his own. All the attention and money he'd poured into her hadn't bought him loyalty. Me. I'm not perfect, but I'm standing on my own 2 feet, and that's enough. That kid in the ripped skeleton costume is gone. The woman who replaced her is someone Richard never thought I'd be. Independent, capable, and finally free of their control.